Hey folks, every one of us has had to deal with algae at some point or another. Okay, I'm assuming you have an aquarium here, but what I'm going to do today is go through a couple of really simple ways that you can defeat algae and win back that tank that looked so good just a few weeks ago. It's all coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec. I hope you're having a great week. I wanted to come in and talk to you today about algae and that sort of thing. But first, a quick update. One, the Flex 32 gallon is doing great. It is doing so much better than expected. I'm not doing much more than just a weekly water change. I am still using water out of the big tank, out of the 210, and then just kind of putting it into the 30 gallon, and the water from the 30 gallon goes out to the pond, so it's kind of this weird cycle. Actually, the pond's doing pretty good too. I ended up pulling out some of the pond plants. I had some plants like inside of the pond, the base pond, and I pulled them out, and really as I was pulling them out, they become so ingrown they pretty much took everything else with them. And I've discovered that I have a little mini shrimp farm going in the bottom of the pond, so that's pretty neat. And lastly, upstairs, I finally got rid of the 55 gallon tank. It is pretty much gone, and the game room is reestablished, and it looks fantastic up there. I can't wait to shoot and of course play some games and hang out with my fish upstairs. I made a video not too long ago about my old coworker Kevin's tank that I took over at work. I think it's called that Kevin tank. And in there, I kind of went through really a lot of the same scenarios that I went through with this one, although I have a little bit more footage of this. So not too long ago, this tank was in some real trouble. It had completely gone to hell. There was one particular reason why. And it's a nice segue into the first reason you might be experiencing an abnormally large amount of algae in your tank. Now, if you're a fan of my update videos, and you know that I do one big update every 6 months, you'll see that back in December, the tank was looking fine, and that continued for quite a while. And just maybe a week or so before the Fluval Flex 32 gallon arrived, this thing, for some reason, had just gone completely bushy. At this time, there were only some Galaxy Rasboras, some baby ones from the last time this tank had a problem, and maybe a couple of cherry red shrimp. I also had a Neurite snail that I put in there, and I noticed that I hadn't seen it in a while. So here's thing number one to look out for: dead animals. You might notice that a fish has gone missing. It doesn't necessarily mean they're dead, but when the odds are that they are, it might be worth having a look around your tank to see if you can find it and get it out. In fact, if you do see a dead fish, and maybe one of your other creatures is eating it already, I would seriously consider maybe pulling that fish out. Now, if what's eating it is easily like 3 times its size, like an Amano shrimp versus a Galaxy Rasbora that happened to pass away, that one I probably wouldn't worry about too much. But there was nothing in there to consume the corpse of this snail. Not even really other snails, because what had happened to it before had pretty much wiped out everything aside from what I'd put back in there or what magically grew out of the carnage, like the baby fish. So eventually I dug deep and I found that there was a really big Neurite snail that had passed away and kind of gone back in the very back of the tank in some bushes where I couldn't see it, and it was just dead. Then of course I was left with like an algae-fied nasty mess. And I had let it go on for probably a few more days because I couldn't immediately deal with it. I've been noticing a real trend though, as far as it growing up on the rocks that I previously had in this tank. And that brings me to number 2 possibility if you've got an algae outbreak, and that's try a partial breakdown. So when I first started to deal with algae in this tank, I wanted to take any creatures that were in there and kind of make sure they were out and safe. So I took the Galaxy Rasboras out, and I put them in the 16 gallon to live with their parents. The same went for the shrimp or any survivors that I had in there. And I actually didn't find a whole bunch of dead things this time. The time before that, it was pretty rough. Lots of dead shrimp. This time, just really a lot of algae and no No dead animals, thankfully. Aside from the snail, of course, who died of natural causes, I'm pretty sure. So plan number one for getting the fish out, or helping myself net the fish out, and kind of dealing with the algae that was just everywhere inside this tank, was to pull the rocks out, all the hardscape, pull it out, and just kind of deal with it separately. I kind of rinsed them off, and I plucked any plants that were doing real well off of there. I had originally intended to kind of clean them off and then put them back, but then I kind of got an idea, because as I pulled them out, I noticed that the sword plants that were in here were just trying to find a way to grow. They were growing all around behind this and into dark areas and stuff. It was shooting off runners all over the place and really wanted to grow in there, but the rocks were taking up all the best spaces under the light, and there really wasn't much of a place to root. The same thing was happening with the crypt parv here in the front, and I decided just to take the rocks out. Really, a lot of what I had them there for was to sort of obscure the face so it could appear to be kind of peeking out like it was hiding somewhere. But I can get that same effect with some like taller plants. So what I did was I took all the runners for the sword plants, and I ended up replanting them all along in the middle. I expanded the crypt parv a little bit. I took some other plants that weren't doing too well, and I moved them around. I initially gave her a crown of this other stem plant that's really pretty. It's kind of this red color, and it's what I've used in there for a long time, but eventually it didn't seem to do very well either. So I ended up removing that too. So here's number 3. You want to enhance your plant growth and notice things that will keep that from happening. So between having no space to really move and root in the optimal spaces under the light, and the fact that the hardscape really wasn't doing anything to deter algae at all, in fact it was making the perfect place for it to grow, between those two things I decided it was best just to remove it. I think it would be possible to reintegrate some of these hardscapes and stuff, but when I'm setting up an aquarium, I can almost look and point to the places that are going to be trouble along the way. And if you've got your hardscape like just too much under the very apex of your light, you know, the brightest point that it's going to be, if that's full of, you know, hard stuff and the tank isn't mature enough, it's just going to grow algae every time, without fail. Of course, something else I did when I cleaned this out is probably going to be my number 4, and that is the mega water change. You've done big water changes before, but I'd like you to possibly consider a 90 to 95% or more water change. Especially if you've already removed all the fish from your tank and there's no chance of things getting any worse. There's nothing quite like replacing the entirety of your water. And it lets you, or very nearly. Now, of course, we're going to replace this water with dechlorinated water or possibly aged water from another tank. It's kind of my new favorite thing to do. But that's what I did last time, and it really seemed to kick off that process of healing a lot faster. And this isn't something that I recommend like doing daily or every week even, but at least once in your cleanup, consider just replacing most of the water. That sort of brings me to my next thing too. So after I filled this up with dechlorinated water, I took a look through the filter. Some of the ceramic media I had has been in use for quite a while, so I decided to take half of it out and replace it with stuff that I have already going in the 210. That stuff's really easy to kind of reach in and just grab a little bit more and add some supplemental bacteria. On top of that, I also added some bottle bacteria like Activate. So the next suggestion is add bacteria from different sources. If this thing's locked into a recycle period where the ammonia shoots way up and your nitrites start to go up too, the plants aren't going to be able to absorb the nutrients they need to grow. Although I think in a lot of cases, the plants are much more able to deal with a cycling tank or a tank that's like hit, you know, like a little bump cycle along the way. They also don't like those conditions. They'd much prefer to be taking up other forms of nutrients. So they're not going to help you a lot. That high ammonia is just going to block them from actually being able to take in the nutrients. And then you're going to be playing a waiting game. Whereas if you've got established bacteria in there that's hungry to take up anything that's extra and deal with it, even if in the long run that extra bacteria you've added, you know, kind of fades away because there's not a lot of fish in there, in the beginning, it'll go ahead and go a long way towards taking anything extra out of the water that algae could eat. And of course, one of the last things that I typically do, so after I've gone through and I've cleaned out the tank, I replanted the plants, I pulled the rocks out. I tried some other floating plants for a while, but I keep coming back to the old standby. I was about to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. I thought it'd be really neat if this tank basically was healed by the time I got back. So I took handfuls of frog bit, or maybe one handful of frog bit, enough to basically almost cover the top, and I just dumped it in the top. Now this isn't super attractive in the short term. The roots and things that come down, you know, they kind of really impede the view. But especially in the small tank, it's just temporary. It's just something to absorb those nutrients, block out some of the light while things are getting reset, and just really take up anything extra that's going around in the water. These plants are all feeding from the roots. So I'm just trying to remove extra nutrients from the water column. Now they're getting that somewhat from the substrate and other things going on in here. But being able to just take this whole water column and make it full of things that are absorbing nutrients and kind of blocking the light off. It doesn't block the light off entirely. The light can pass through these things. You can see a little bit of light coming through these. You can also take the roots and just kind of pluck it off. They don't like it a whole lot, but it doesn't seem to kill them either. So it is possible to do that every now and then. Especially if you've got a particularly ugly one, or you just want to get rid of a couple of them for a nice photo after you've sort of cured your tank. A lot of times the roots will go back, sometimes they don't, but these things propagate so quickly that so long as you have one healthy one, you'll have many, many healthy ones for some time. I've used frog bit in about a dozen different aquariums to just kind of defeat hair algae. Hair algae is the one that plagues me the most. I also get the black beard algae. If you've got that, for me, what I've found is the best thing is you're going to have to find the root cause, which is usually too much food or some exposure to sunlight, you know, something refracting through a window or coming directly from a window. I've got a ton of aquariums in this other room and 2 big windows that have caused a lot of hair algae over the years. The other way to go is to find something that eats it. People say a mono shrimp will eat that stuff. I've never seen one specifically munching on it, but what I have seen are the Siamese algae eaters. You have to make sure you don't get the flying fox or one of the lookalikes, but if you can get a Siamese algae eater, they will specifically eat blackbeard algae, among a lot of other things. But I've seen 2 of them absolutely mow down and like completely change the face of a tank just by removing all of that stuff, and it's really something to see. They're the only fish I know for sure that can help you with that. But counting on fish to be your janitors and stuff like that, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's good to be logical and think, like if you go to feed your fish and you notice a lot of stuff's going to the bottom, maybe it's time to consider a shrimp or a snail or something else to kind of eat up the extra food. And then that way they can kind of help from extra nutrients from getting out into the tank. But then again, they're also going to defecate, and then you've got that to add stuff to the tank. A lot of aquarists are always talking about this balance, this magical balance that you're trying to get to. And it's absolutely true. Unfortunately, every single aquarium, even if you went and set up, if you watched the video and set this up exactly like I did, you're still going to have a different scenario because it's going to be sitting in a different house at a different temperature with different water. I get algae beating questions almost daily, which is part of the reason why I made more than one video where I'm defeating algae. And I try to log the different ways that it happens. Sometimes it comes up and it's a real surprise. Sometimes it's a constant nuisance. But what I found is in my planted tanks, the ones where I can get the plants to actually grow, in those tanks I always win in the end. And a lot of times it's just patience. The timeline for recovery for this thing was about a month. It was about a month. So I was putting this together. I was trying to fix it because I knew I was going to be breaking down the 55 upstairs to build the 32-gallon flex, and I needed some place for some of the fish to go. There was an enormous amount of shrimp up there too, shrimp and other fish. Now the fish, they found their homes in all kinds of tanks around everywhere else, but this thing was in the midst of its problem. So while I was taking that tank down, setting that tank up, putting stuff in the 210, I had so many projects kind of happening all at the same time. Really the best I could do is just get this cleaned up enough and just hope that the algae was gone. So before I went on vacation, of course, I dumped all the plants in the top and I just let it sit. When I came back, there was not a trace of algae left. I also had a partially broken down 55 running upstairs. So the pumps were still running. There were basically no plants in there at all, but everything seemed to be okay. Nothing went toxic when I pulled everything out. So I had tons of shrimp, just so many shrimp in there. They were all over the place. So I took all the shrimp that were left and I've placed them in here. And now I've got a nice little shrimp habitat for my cherry red shrimp. I'm already seeing gravid females and babies. There's a teeny tiny little baby right here. So that's cool. I'm not sure what the future of this tank is. I'll probably add some more fish eventually. I do have one Galaxy Rasbora that was the holdout. I think it was the same holdout from before because it looks like a mature one. There's just one. He lives under the neck of this lady and I cannot get him. I'm not fast enough with the net or something, but he will not come out and be captured to join his buddies. So I just leave him alone now. He's got lots of shrimp to keep him company, so I hope that's okay. So of course I didn't want piles and piles of the frog bit. So what I've done is I've gradually pulled it out. So there's another thing that can cause an algae problem is you don't want to get reliant on this covering of plants and then remove it all at once. So what I did is I took about a quarter of the frog bed and I removed it. And I waited a week and then I removed another quarter. And now I've got it down to just a small handful. There's just a little bit floating around in there. And I'll probably keep it at about this level for a while unless I decide I don't like the look of it on top. The shrimp really seem to love it. They're crawling up and down the roots and having a good time. So maybe I'll leave it for a while. But I'm definitely not going to let it grow completely over the tank like I did before. So that's my story with this tank, folks. Of course, there are other ways to defeat algae. Some people like to use a chemical like Flourish Excel, and which a lot of people mistakenly call liquid carbon. Even myself, I always call it out in the comments section of one of my videos, or I think might have been a live stream, because that's the kind of thing I might say in a live stream, because I'm just talking off the top of my head. And I normally like to verify things before I just say them. But anyway, Flourish Excel, the active ingredient in Flourish Excel is an algicide. I've been explained how exactly it works, and it's kind of like it kills off a number of things, and then it can the carbon that comes from that is somehow taken up or something like that. I'll be honest, I don't completely understand the way it's supposed to work, but I know that if you just do a 15-minute Google search on the active ingredients in there, you'll see that it's an algicide. And from what I've been told, the pearling that you'll see on a plant after you've poured that in there is really just it's kind of killed off like a surface layer of the plant. And along with that, of course, it'll take off the algae. So you can kind of burn off sections of, an outer coating of your plants, and they're pearling, and you think, oh, wow, they're really taking up oxygen, but it's releasing oxygen the same way it does when you snip a stem or something like that. So you can use it to effectively fight algae, but I definitely would not overuse it. And I don't think I'll ever try to use it as a replacement for carbon or CO2. Just to me, I don't feel good about using it that way. Or at least I'm not going to recommend it to you guys. I'm not personally using it that way anymore. I have in the past. I didn't see a lot of problems with it. In fact, I might have had some success here and there with it. But it's super important to be consistent and really follow the directions and stuff like that. And I can't be bothered. You could also trigger algae by experimenting with new chemicals, fertilizers, and stuff like that. Other things besides, liquid carbon. One thing I've been doing lately is as I do a water change, when I do my weekly water change, I'll go around and I'll give my tanks a little squirt with this thing. These little squirt cans are great. I think every squirt's like 2 or 3 milliliters. I'm probably wrong on that, but it's a nice little dose, and over time I've learned like how much of a squirt I can give each tank, or how many squirts. So as I'm doing my water changes, I like to replace just some of the trace elements. And I don't do this. This is kind of a new thing. I've used just Flourish and a couple of other Seachem products in the exact same way. Well, in the old days, I used to run around with a little cap and then try to do it. The squirt bottle is like ingenious. Thank you, Greg Jones. But I keep that in the fridge, and when I do my water changes, I give them a little squirt as well. As long as you're consistent and it's always the same, you're gonna give your plants some benefit. If you're doing it every other day, and sometimes it's 3 squirts, and sometimes it's 1 squirt, and stuff, the environment's really not going to be able to adjust to it, and you'll get algae. Bad algae, probably. One of the things I want to buy for an Aqua Shopper episode would probably be one of those little dosing pumps. I'm real curious about whether or not I could make one of those work versus using CO2. I really wish I could set up 2 of the exact same tanks and put CO2 on one and a dosing pump on the other, and see which one overall does better. That would be neat. So find me on Patreon. I'm just kidding. I don't have a Patreon. Hey folks, I just wanted to let you know that I do have swag on Teespring. I've got like a really cool coffee mug. I've got sweatshirts and shirts and stuff with the Pecktec logo. And that's going to be up for a while. I'm also going to add some more stuff to it. I'm working on that kind of slowly, but I am going to be adding some shirts there. I'm excited because it's one of the few ways I can kind of share swag and stuff like that with people in other countries. It's really cool to see my shirt on people so far away. So if you do buy a shirt or mug or sticker or whatever, be sure to send me an email with a picture so I can show it off, like this fellow. This handsome fellow with a really huge fish tank. Man, how many gallons is that? Or how many liters is that? I'd like to know. So you can look up Pecktec on Teespring, or sometimes you'll see ads and just below the video. I try to put a link inside of the description, but sometimes it doesn't work. But please stop by and have a shirt. Every bit of that money goes to help the show. And I'm going to be putting some more cool and funny stuff. I've got some great ideas. But we'll talk more about all that at a later time. Well, folks, thank you for coming by and listening to me ramble on about algae. I hope this helps some of you, and if you've got a favorite way to defeat algae yourself, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. You can also let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see, as I'd love to make some content that you want to watch. Wouldn't we all, right? If only they'd tell us what they want. Also, if you'd like a little more frequent updates and stuff like that, be sure to follow me on Instagram or Pecktec on YouTube, on Facebook. If you look for me at either of those 2 places, I post some pictures pretty regularly of different things, mostly aquarium stuff and other stuff going on in my life. A lot of clips you see on this show, you see a little bit early by following me there, because they're too cool not to show you right away. I'll be back next week. Till then, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Mama. Take anything. So number 3, you want to. The other thing I did to kind of help along the same time is my 4 or 5. It's gotta be 5. So they're not going to help you a lot, and they're in. Now, of course, this isn't the stuff in the twin. I've used a couple of other ferts things that I got from.